I remember I don't remember the book about the Soviet Union, and there was a story that stayed with me for a long time. In this story, a woman bought a piece of meat and wrapped it in a paper, and on this paper were Stalin image, Stalin photograph, and she wrapped the meat in this newspaper. And what happened to her? She got 10 years of labor camp for this. And every time when I talk about it to some people in America, everybody look at me in shock and like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. But somehow, a lot of people don't notice the same similarity. Not exactly the same like it was in Soviet Union, but close here in America as well. And also there's another story I've read. I again don't remember the book, but one of the Soviet book, there was two Bolshevik soldiers. They were in a church. And what they did, they urinate in a church. And two priests were watching them urinating in the church. And one of the priests told another, I'm afraid of them. And the other priest responded, you don't have to fear them. You have to fear their children. There's these two stories, and they're very incredibly important now to understand fully. Because a lot of people, we always think that atrocities comes out of the blue, and we can recognize them easily, and we can fight them right away. The problem with atrocities, the problem with the behavior like this lack of freedom of speech and this denigration of religion, it comes slowly, one step at a time. It's like a frog in a boiling water. If you put frog in a boiling water, it will jump out. But if you slowly increase temperature, you can boil the frog alive. It would stay in the water because the water getting gradually warm and warm and warm, eventually getting so hot that frog just boiling alive. That's the point. Everything is happening now in the West and in America. We have to be constantly aware that there's always going to be people who want to try to take our rights away of freedom of speech. And they're going to use a lot of sneaky ideas, a lot of erroneous ideas, a lot of bad ideas to do that. And if we ignore them, and if we don't do anything about it, if we don't exercise our freedom of speech, it eventually will become irrelevant before it will be taken away from us. That's how it works. I remember I always have this argument with the guns, because a lot of people said that there's no way the government will take away guns from America. The government doesn't have to take the guns from America. The government is just can make incredibly complicated laws where you will go to jail for self-defense while using those guns. And eventually majority of people stop using those guns because they're going to be simply afraid of using them, since your own self-defense will become almost illegal in the country. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but that's how the government operate. They create a bunch of laws, and eventually normal thing like self-defense, like freedom of speech, would be very, very fearful to exercise. Once you create this fear in people, where they're afraid of exercising their own position, their own ideas, their own freedom of speech, their own self-defense, you already won. The guns, it's become just, I don't know, something on the wall, something like a statue in your house, some, I don't know, piece that on the wall for beautiful view. You're not going to use those guns because you're going to be terrified. And even not you, how about your kids who will grow up with this idea, with this mentality that self-defense is a bad thing? Because that's how Soviet Union operated. They absolutely rewrote human idea of existence in a different way and then force people to believe in that idea. And if you didn't believe it, it was on you, because what they do, they force you to pretend to believe it. And once you pretend it for several years, you actually start believing this idea, because that's how humanity works. We can be trained to believe in anything out of fear of losing comfort, out of fear of losing freedom, out of fear of losing our life. That's what my main concern about in America, because a lot of people, they don't realize where this line, we're slowly moving this line toward tyranny, very slowly. And people getting used to this, people getting used to that, and again and again. And funny thing about, for example, socialism, it's always attract the weak kind of man. Because it's kind of like socialism take your agency away from you. And if you're weak, you already have no agency. And what it does, socialists take away your agency and gives you back this idea that it's not your fault. It's those rich guy faults who took all your opportunities, and that's why you cannot manage in this life. And that's why it's so attractive to weak people or to women in general, because women in some sense are natural socialists. Why? Because when a woman have a family, right? Woman has a family, she has to distribute food equally well to all members of the family. She is responsible for this food distribution because it's on her to make kids and husbands equal portion. That's why women are natural socialists, while men are natural. They obsessed with their own agency, with individuality. That's why the founders' fathers were men, because they came up with this idea of personal responsibility of being individual. And that's the problem, because you have this feminist man who, along with the women, want to create this socialist utopia, ignoring historical facts, how bad it was in the last century, how many millions of people died as the result. But the problem is, it's always going to be attractive, because if something wrong with your life, it's really hard to tell, okay, it's my fault. I have to do something about it myself. I have to change my life by myself. It's hard. That's why you look up for people who will tell you that it's not your fault. It's all this rich guy fault, because you poor, because you honest, because you great, because you too decent. Let us redistribute resources. Let us give you opportunity, any opportunity you want, and let us to make your life feel good. Feel good, not exactly good, but feel good, because that's what socialism is. It forces people to feel good. They're not good. Under socialism, nobody is good. Everybody is actually bad and poor, but you have this feeling of goodness, that feeling of fairness, because you're not suffering only by yourself. There's a bunch of people around you suffering right now during socialism utopia. Under capitalism, you suffer by yourself, because you see people around you who manage somehow their lives, and you don't see much of their internal struggle, because they usually hide this struggle behind the walls of their houses. During socialism, there's no walls, there's no houses, just these apartments when people live together, and they all suffer equally well. That's what socialism does. That's what weak people love it, especially weak men, because they cannot handle and take responsibility. They cannot handle their own life and take responsibility for their own agency. But coming back to freedom of speech, we have to be careful with this idea. We have to keep exercising. And the point is, you have to protect freedom of speech of those who you disagree the most, because that's, I think, is a great idea of freedom of speech. If you don't like someone saying something, some words, you have to stand behind those people, because that's the whole point of freedom of speech. Otherwise, if you let them go, if you let them to be suppressed, eventually these forces will come after you. The problem with people who oppose freedom of speech, oppose being individual, oppose your own agency, oppose personal responsibility, it's those people who are obsessed with their own feelings. They believe that their subjective experience can dictate how other people are supposed to live, supposed to talk, and supposed to behave around them. And that's the problem, because your subjective experience is supposed to adapt to objective reality, not to try to change objective reality to your subjective experience. We have to be very cautious. We can lose freedom so easy. Freedom is not self-evident. All rights are not self-evident. We can lose everything like this. It can happen easy. The point is, when people become very comfortable in the environment they live, they start avoiding uncomfortable conversations. And once people start avoiding uncomfortable conversations, they start sharing what they really think about certain important topics. And once they stop sharing this, how are you supposed to know who's on your side or who think the same way as you do? What happens is you seems like isolated in your own common sense, and you believe that people around you have no common sense anymore, and everybody became isolated inside of their own little tiny units, and they think there's no more common sense. And that's what all tyranny needs. It needs people who don't trust to each other. They need community who don't trust to each other. That's why those communities are incredibly weak, because people don't trust anymore inside of those communities to each other. They don't trust, and they don't know if my neighbor have common sense. I have no idea if my neighbor have common sense because I don't talk to my neighbors, and that's where the problems come, because you don't talk to your neighbors, you don't talk to nobody, and you're afraid, you're terrified to express your opinion at work. And what happens is the dominant idiotic opinion filled with the feelings dominate usually. And I experienced this by myself at my previous work. People expressing such an idiotic ideas openly, loudly, and when you try to criticize them, you become racist, you become sexist, you become Islamophobe, you become transphobe, you become homophobe, you become everything worse they can label you with, just simply expressing common sense, just simply trying to build an argument, just simply to asking, just inquiry of, okay, why do you think this way? Why do you think that way? People created their own history. People created their own idea of slavery. People created their own idea of rights, and it's have no basic underneath. They have no base underneath. They have no argument. They have nothing, but somehow they're loud, and they feel they're on the right because they're louder than you. And I noticed one thing: the more you know, the less you want to scream with people, the less you want to argue with people, because you have to understand why you make an argument, because it's hard to argue with somebody when you know that they don't hear you, they don't understand you, they're obsessed with their own feelings, they're obsessed with their own idea of reality. They like their own personal subjective experience, and they try to look for confirmation bias. And it's not about truth. It's about this superiority. It's all about superiority with a lot of people currently, like nowadays, because they found this idea of their own personal superiority, and they try to live inside of this idea of personal superiority. And if you dare to question their idea of personal superiority, you become all of those bad things that you can usually hear online or on mainstream media. Because we need argument, we need always ask question why, because I always want to be corrected. But I want to be corrected for my ideas, not for personal attacks, because I hate when people attack personality. You do not attack somebody's person. You attack this person's ideas, and it's quite different, because you can debate other people's ideas, because people can change those ideas. But if you attack somebody's personality, that's bad. And I notice people don't see the difference, because there's ideas. That's what I have. This is my ideas. That's how I see the world. That's my subjective experience of the world, and I hope my subjective experience of the world based on certain information that I learned from the books, podcast, from certain thinkers. Now tell me why my ideas are wrong. But if you attack me personally, that's different, because it does make no sense. And that's what a lot of people do. They attack other people personally. They call them racist. But do you have proof that this person is racist? They call them Islamophobe, which is not even a thing. But again, do you have proof? I love Christopher Hitchens, one of the greatest thinkers. Christopher Hitchens said that whatever asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.